Good day. My name is Egbert Schram, CEO at the Hofstede Insights Group. Welcome to our webinar on how to use and leverage the power of our organizational culture analytics. Culture, to start with, exists on multiple layers. In the core of culture, the deepest layer, we talk about values. That's the values that we grew up with, as raised by our parents and raised by our teachers. These values tell us a lot about how we feel about things. But what we do, our practices, are typically more influenced by the organizational context in which we operate. And these practices differ from one organization to the next. Even within one organization, they differ from one unit to the next. This is what we're going to talk about in a bit more detail today. Organizational culture. I think it would be useful to start with a definition. How do we define organizational culture? Organizational culture is the way in which members of an organization or parts of an organization relate to each other, their work, and the outside world when compared to other organizations. This definition has been raised by one of our founders, Professor Dr. Geert Hofstede, and this definition also lays behind the philosophy we use when measuring organizational culture. So we measure how do people relate to each other, their work, and the outside world when compared to other organizations. Another clarification to make, and that's a rather important one, is that culture is not about good or bad. It is all about being functional. Does it work for you or does it work against you? Another clarification is that culture is not about is it nice or not. Of course, it would be nice to have a nice culture, but first and foremost, the business priority is to make sure that the way we work supports the strategy. And after that, if we want to further optimize the way people work, of course, then it will help to make it nice as well, but only after we've made it functional. Why would you want to do an organizational culture scan? There are a couple of reasons. Often organizations come to us when they have a feeling that something is not quite right inside their organizations. They feel that the way people work isn't necessarily making a lot of sense. So an organizational culture scan will help you to put gut feelings into numbers. It makes culture tangible, measurable. It helps you to understand in which directions are the tendencies of behavior within your organization, and are these directions in line with where you want your organization to go to. Furthermore, you might want to start with an organizational culture scan if you're not sure about where to start with your change processes. A culture scan will help you to prioritize these change processes. And last but not least, the key to any successful change program is to ensure consistency. Using the power of our organizational culture approach will provide you with a couple of things. First and foremost, it will give you insight in how do people relate to their work. And for anybody of you that has ever been involved in recruitment processes, you will know that the text organizations use to describe how it is often rather far away from how it actually is. So an organizational culture scan will help you to visualize in great detail how is it actually experienced by your employees to be inside your organization. It will help to make your recruitment much more spot on. Secondly, it will provide you with very crucial information about if you have a gap between where you want to go and where you are at the moment. Are the parameters that will conduct and facilitate an easy change process actually in shape? Is there enough trust? Is there not too much anxiety? Are people ready to change? And readiness for change is not just about do they want to change, but do they feel that they have enough information? Do they feel they have enough experience? All of this information our analytics will provide you with. And last but not least, when you measure a gap, it's often very important to understand why is the gap there, how is it relevant for your organization, and what is it that you're going to do about it. Taking into account also the impact of national culture, how we feel. So here we go again with the link between what we do and how we feel. Our approach will help you to visualize this. Now, let's say you have decided to get started. How do we get started in an organizational culture process? First and foremost, we have a discussion intake on how many subcultures, what type of subcultures, kind of subgroups inside your organization do you want to measure? Often, these subgroups are distinguishable, for example, by hierarchy or by function. But for every process, we always have an intake discussion with you to basically get clear what needs to be measured. The second step is to provide and understand the context in which your organization and parts of the organization operate. Context is important because let's assume that you are heavily regulated, but you need to become more innovative because that's what your strategy calls for. Can you break regulations in order to become even more innovative or not? Sounds like a basic question, but it is quite shocking how often organizational management teams differ quite a bit in their understanding of what is the context. So, first step, clarify the context. Reach a consensus on what does the strategy actually mean. Then we dive into the metrics, and after the metrics, we look into the gap analysis. Where are gaps? Why are they there? How are they impacting our work? And what are we going to do about it? That's the last step, the change. Two approaches to change in our philosophy. One is the direct way, helping executives in particular to address their behavior, to showcase what it actually means to be an executive inside this organization with this type of a strategy. And second of all, indirect change. What are the processes that we need to change? What are the symbols that we need to change in order to provide consistency in the change process? Who should be involved? Ideally, you have buy-in from your management team or the board of directors. From our experience, based on over 30 years of experience in 5,000 plus organizations, those projects that were successful had a hands-on involvement of a management team. If your management team is not ready to change its own behavior, my advice, perhaps counterintuitively, would be to drop the culture change project because it's not going to go anywhere. If the management team is not involved, the rest of the organization will not follow. So besides the management team, ideally a culture champion inside your organization that can help leverage the internal energy and align timelines. Furthermore, we need as many subcultures within your organization to be that are relevant for your strategy at this particular point in time to be measured. And for each subculture, subgroup, we need a minimum of 20 respondents to really visualize culture at play. For management teams, obviously, this is slightly less. There are typically not 20 people, but for any other subgroup, it should be ideally a minimum of 20. Why is this? Because if it is less than 20 people, then personality will typically have a larger impact than culture. Last and not least, have an external consultant, one of our Hofstede Insights facilitators, to act as an antagonizer for your management team. An antagonizer sounds perhaps a bit negative, but what it really means is that an antagonizer, a facilitator that is schooled by us, will help your management team to really get down to earth with whatever is meant with the strategy at hand. If a management team can't do this, the chances that it will be understood lower down in the organizations will diminish rapidly. Once we have analyzed culture, visualize the gap and the reasons for the gap, the next step is to create an internal group of culture ambassadors or change navigators or whatever title you might want to give them. They should have a name to carry forward any change inside your organization. So you are not dependent on outside consultants alone. In terms of the actual survey process, there is a combination of 3 different surveys. One survey, which we call the actual survey, which gets distributed among as wide a population as possible and necessary inside your organization, which is about the working practices. What are the working practices that we observe? And you will see some of the question examples in the slide in front of you. These questions are asked as a statement. Where I work, the following applies. And then you get one of these statements that you see in front of you. Or people select neutral, which of course in itself is also an interesting answer. This is the most widely distributed survey. There are 2 more surveys, short factual surveys. One survey to be answered by either the chairman of the board, HR director or CEO, which talks about and helps to provide insight in what is the environment in which the organization finds itself. Has it been through rapid reorganizations recently? Is it heavily regulated? Is it capital intensive? All of these questions and all of the answers to these questions impact how and where culture should be leveraged. A similar question, factual, is also asked for each of the subgroup heads, because for each functional unit, for example, they might face different regulatory environments. Just think for yourself the difference between your production environment and your marketing team. Safety regulations typically are much more dictating how your production team should work than they will predict how your marketing team works. If you were to neglect this, you will basically be building sandcastles, and I trust you don't want to do this. So again, we have to contextualize. A very relevant question is about how do we handle data security? All answers to all surveys are anonymized. In other words, it is not possible for facilitators or your organization to retrieve personally identifiable answers. Second of all, the data is all stored on secured servers in Finland, meaning within the European Union, where the typically data protection regulations are rather strict. Furthermore, as a standard, we use SSL encryption to secure the transmission of any answer data. Our methodology as such has a name, and that name is the multi-focus model. Why is that? Because with the same set of question batteries, we can help you to visualize the impact that culture has on over 200 different organizational challenges. And these challenges, they might differ from burnout prevention to efficiency increasement to innovation development. Any modern day challenge can be captured by the questions within the multi-focus model. And depending on the challenge, the secret lies in how we look at the answer patterns. Different challenges require different patterns to be identified. And this is what we have automated and basically made available for you. In the model itself, we talk about dimensions. And another way of looking at dimensions is tendencies. So if we take one example, there are 6 dimensions in this multi-focus model. The first example could be about organizational effectiveness. There are 2 poles. Do we focus on how we work, which is what we call means-oriented, or do we focus on what it is that we do, which is what we call goal-oriented? And the exercise I'd like to give you is whenever you see these dimensions and their different sides, is to reflect. What do you feel about it? And then, after you've reflected on that, take a step back and ask yourself the question, if this feels unpleasant, but it is functional for the organization to be this way, where does that leave you? And this is the critical reflection in our methodology. We step away from what is nice, we get into what is functional. One element to raise, if you're an organization working in a multicultural context, is the difference between organizational culture and national culture. If you remember the onion we showed in the beginning, culture has multiple layers. Organizational culture, again, is about what is it that we do, what is our behavior. Ideally, this is in line with what we should be doing. National culture tells us a lot about how is the likelihood that people will feel positively or negatively about a certain practice. Ideally, you optimize behavior by letting people work in a way that also feels good. If you can't do this for whatever reason, then make sure that the exchange rate you offer to people, whether that be learning, promotion, or money, is good enough, because then you might be able for some time to counter strongly negative feelings about what people are doing. But ideally, you have the best of positive feelings with a working practice that supports your strategy, and then nobody can beat you. If you want to have more information, you want to see examples of demo reports, in this presentation you will see the different links, and when you click on the link you will get the relevant information right in front of you. So you'll have all the time in the world to study what is actually in the reports that we will provide you with. To summarize, our organization has over 30 years of experience in making culture tangible. We work with over 5,000 clients, ranging from small companies to large multinational multiple billion-dollar companies. Culture touches everybody, and the secret to making it work for you is to understand where it touches you, how that impacts your business, and what you can do differently to become even better in the way you do things. Thank you for sitting in on this presentation, and if you have any further questions, please do feel free to reach out to us. Thank you. Goodbye.